And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Welcome to part 2 of my videos on Heroscape, one of my favorite games that I've ever played. In the last one I talked a little bit about building the terrain and a little bit an introduction to it, but I think basically at this point in time I need to show you how the game works. Now the game comes with two sets of rules. You have your master game guide and you have your basic game guide. Let me show you what you need to do with the basic game guide. Yeah, I really don't like the basic game at all, and I don't know anybody who plays it. It's very, very simple. Characters move, roll dice, attack each other, hit, and it's just a very simplistic version of the game, but even kids can understand the advanced version. It's not nearly as well balanced as the advanced version, but don't be afraid when we say master rule guide. The game is very simple. Let me show you an example. The first thing players do after choosing a scenario and building the terrain is they pick an army that they're going to be using. Each character or group of characters in the game comes with an army card, and it has two sides for the basic side and the advanced side, which is what we're going to be looking at. Now in part 3 I'm going to be doing a more detailed look at characters themselves, but at the bottom of each card here you see the points. So you determine a point total for your army, maybe 600-700 points, and then you make sure that the total of all the points of each of the characters you pick comes underneath that total. So you pick your characters. Then, at the beginning of each turn in the game, players will be rolling dice. There's two types of dice that come in the game, and one of them is your typical 20-sided die. So at the beginning of each round, both players, and I'm going to assume a two-player game for now, will be rolling a 20-sided die, and the player who rolls higher goes first. But how do you move and how do you do anything on your turn? Well, each player has 4 of these tokens here. These are order tokens, and you can see that they're numbered from 1, 2, and 3, and then there's an X. And what players will be doing is they will be placing these tokens on the character cards for their army. And so whoever wins initiative, whoever rolls the higher number, goes first, and they will take their number 1, show it to the other player, and then they will move and or attack with that unit. And then the other player does their number 1. Then you pick your number 2 and move and attack with that unit. Then your number 3. Your X never moves. You put that out there basically so your opponent does not know exactly what forces you'll be moving that turn. It's basically a bluff token. You're even allowed to put more than one token on the same character. So I can move him as number 1, move this group as number 2, and move him as number 3. You can even put all 3 on the same character, but of course that limits your tactical options. So let's look here a little bit about how the game is played. And here we have one group, the Axe Grinders of Burning Forge, a bunch of dwarves, going up against the Arbrian Archers, who are elves. And of course we know that dwarves hate elves, so this is probably one of their fearsome battles that they have waged. Now we'll be looking at the card, and let's say that the dwarves are being activated. The dwarves have a movement of 4 spaces, so each dwarf on the card can move. See, some cards have only one character on them, and that character is more powerful. Other cards have a squad of characters, like these dwarves. They're less powerful, but you get to move 4 of them for one order. So let's say they're moving 4. So this dwarf goes 1, 2, 3, 4. This dwarf goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And this dwarf 1, 2, 3, 4. And this dwarf goes 1, 2. Now he wants to move up on top here. To move up a level, you have to pay an extra movement point for each level you move up. So, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4. If he was over here on this ledge, wanting to go all the way up to here, it would cost 1 to move plus 2, 3, 4. So it would cost all his movement to climb up there. And in fact, if it was higher than his height completely, the dwarf wouldn't be able to climb it. So this dwarf moves here. So 3 of the dwarves are now next to the archers, the elves. They are now going to attack them. This is where we look at the cards, and we see here that the dwarves have an attack of 3, while the elves have a defense of 2. So we will be using these special dice to roll in this game. Each one of these dice has 3 sides that show a skull on, 2 sides that show a shield, and 1 side with nothing. So when the dwarves attack with their attack, and in this case it was 3, so let's say we roll the dice, and we pull the dice together, they have rolled 1 skull, which means they have hit 1 time. The elves now are going to roll, and they rolled 1 shield, which blocks that 1 hit, so they take no damage. If, for example, though, they had 2 hits and only rolled 1 shield, they would have taken 1 damage, which in the instance of these archers, you can see that they have only 1 life. So that would kill the archer in question. Some creatures have more than 1 life, and at that point you'll just put a wound marker on the card until they've taken enough wounds to kill them. There are a few other things to take into account. One, if you are higher than the person you're attacking, so the dwarf here is on a higher terrain level than this elf here, he will get an extra attack dice. If the elf had been higher and the dwarf had been attacking him from a lower spot, then the elf would get an extra defense dice. And it's possible that if you're even higher, 10 levels higher, you'll get 2 defense dice, basically shooting from a higher position. And that brings me to another good point, shooting. Each character has a range value, and if that range is only 1, as it is in the instance of these dwarves here, or the instance of this character, that means they can only attack someone when they're adjacent to them. But in the case of like these elves here, they have a range of 7, which means when they attack, they can basically shoot. So in this instance, the elves, if it's their turn to attack, they will shoot at the dwarves. They don't even have to move. Again, the height bonuses may come into play, and they roll the dice to fire at the elves, maybe taking a couple of the dwarves out of the picture. And that's basically how the game works. One, you move your characters, you fight the other person's characters, you move them, you fight them. So you'll say, well, why should I move? I'll just sit back in my highly defensive position and wait for the enemy to come to me and then destroy them. Well, this game comes with a very, very good way around that. Heroscape comes with something that are called glyphs. Glyphs are little plastic hexagon things that are placed usually in central strategic points on the battlefield. Players will want to move their characters so that when a character stands on top of a glyph, the glyph is revealed. And for example, this glyph here tells you that it gives a move +2. Now that move +2 counts for your entire army. So as long as this character stands on top of that glyph, your whole army has a move +2. That is a major advantage. And there are other glyphs. For example, this glyph gives all your common units a +1 die when attacking. This glyph gives you a +8 when attacking. Now, scenarios might have preset glyphs, or you might use random ones. There's even some glyphs that are negative. There's glyphs that keep people from flying. There's glyphs that add to attack. There's glyphs that add to defense. There's glyphs that add to range. There's one that can heal people, one that can summon someone next to you. And so these make a big deal, and so if you put them at various strategic points in the battlefield, like maybe I'll put one here right in the middle of this lava area, well, that's a pretty dangerous area, and you have to stand on this cliff, and so your enemy is going to not want to see you have this advantage on their team, so they're going to come and try and kill the person on the cliff or force them to move, and this adds a really good dynamic to the game. It keeps people from staying on their side, but forces them to go forth and attack. Most games, usually once you kill a certain amount of the enemy, you've won, although different scenarios may have different victory conditions. Be the first one to get to a tower and hold it. Try to kill a specific person on your opponent's team, etc. Terrain has an effect on the battlefield, but not as much as you might think. For example, see the sand terrain and the grass terrain, there's really no difference functionally of it. It's mostly there to look good. In fact, that's the way most of the terrain in this game is, and I'm glad for that. I already mentioned the height and needing to climb up and having an advantage when you're on top of it. You can even, if someone jumps off a height that's too high, they can take damage. Water is a big deal. If you move into water, you have to stop moving, so it can slow down your advance. There's road pieces. You can see them here. And when you start and end your movement on the road, you get +3 movement. There's lava, which is deadly. If you step in lava, roll a 20-sided die. If you roll a 20-sided die, you live. And then, of course, there's trees and other things, and those are there sometimes to basically block line of sight. This game's line of sight is very simple. If your character can see the other character, they can shoot them. If they can't see them, they can't shoot them. So, again, the game is very, very simple, and that's how you play it. But what we want to talk about now in our next video are the characters themselves. But that's continued in part 3.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.